In the shadow of the Eternity Gate, where pilgrims queue for glimpses of the Golden Throne's distant radiance, stands a pedestal that tells a different story. The obsidian platform rises 4 meters from the polished floor, its surface scarred by mounting bolts arranged in the precise pattern once required to anchor a primarch's bronze likeness. The holes remain visible despite 10 millennia of pilgrim traffic, their edges worn smooth by countless fingers tracing the absent form. Palace curators maintain the space with meticulous care, polishing the empty stone daily, yet no placard explains what once stood here. You feel the absence like a draft, a pressure that insists on being measured. Begin with the arithmetic everyone knows and no one says aloud. The Emperor of Mankind created 20 primarchs to lead his Great Crusade across the galaxy. 20 demigods scattered by chaos, recovered one by one, reunited with their gene-forged legions to conquer worlds in his name. Yet today, in the 41st millennium, only 18 are remembered in official doctrine. 20 sons forged for empire. 18 permitted hymns and sculpture. 2 consigned to subtraction. The difference is not mystery, it is maintenance. This represents the Imperium's first experiment in what archivists privately term administrative death. Unlike execution, which creates martyrs, or exile, which permits return, administrative death achieves something more complete. The target ceases to exist in any meaningful sense. Records vanish from cogitator banks. Statues disappear from public squares. Names fade from regimental honors and ceremonial litanies. What remains is absence itself, carefully maintained and ruthlessly enforced. Memory is turned into a workflow, docketed and justified, given an audit trail so that the pious and the pragmatic can share a desk. This process requires infrastructure. In the deepest vaults of the Administratum's Terran headquarters, clerks labor in chambers lit by phosphor lamps, their fingers stained with the red wax used to seal documents marked for eternal silence. The ritual they perform bears an ancient name, the 9 Seals of Remission. 9 distinct stamps, each bearing a different aspect of imperial authority, applied in precise sequence to transform heroes into non-entities. The first seal bears the aquila marking imperial interest. The 9th shows a simple void, completing the transformation from glory to emptiness. Each seal has its color, its hymn, its operating manual. When the 9th dries, statute becomes amnesia. The scope extends far beyond the lost primarchs. Throughout imperial history, loyal servants have found themselves subjected to systematic forgetting. The Thunder Warriors who conquered Terra were erased to make room for cleaner origins. Space Marine chapters that served with distinction have been reduced to footnotes, then to silence. Consider the Lamenters, whose gene seed traces back to Sanguinius himself, yet whose name appears on no honor rolls despite centuries of faithful service. Their battle brothers wear bone-colored identification tags bearing serial numbers rather than names, a subtle indication of their expendable status. When they deploy to war zones, transport manifests list them as auxiliary assets rather than Astartes formations. Walk far enough from the palace and you reach a tithes office where a widow takes receipt of name-null scrip and learns it cannot be exchanged until her spouse's designation is reconciled with a convoy manifest that now reads no record. In the trenches, a sergeant recites his squad, then swallows the last name and calls it discipline. Guard regiments that bled for the Emperor's vision have been reclassified as miscellaneous tonnage in casualty reports. The logic is cruel but legible. A war state that cannot stop must learn to close stories while their protagonists still breathe. Grief is a supply chain problem. Remembrance is a delay. So the ecclesiarch dresses silence in piety. The munitorum tallies erasure as efficiency. The Mechanicus offers liturgical checksums to justify purges. This is how a civilization made of attrition survives its own appetite, by converting memory into fuel. The empty pedestal serves as both warning and promise. It demonstrates that no service, however glorious, guarantees remembrance. The mounting bolts remain visible not as oversight but as deliberate reminder. In the 41st millennium, erasure is not punishment reserved for traitors and heretics. It is maintenance, as routine and necessary as replacing worn cogitator components. In an empire where survival is measured in tonnage and names are luxuries that wars cannot afford, forgetting becomes the most essential skill of all. When did the Imperium learn to do this with such practiced hand? The trail runs backward before the Crusade left Sol to a time when victory required pruning the very branches that reached it. We will meet the teachers on Terra, where the 9 seals were first warmed by breath and blood. The first lesson in systematic erasure was written in the blood of Terra's own defenders, long before the Great Crusade carried the Emperor's vision beyond Sol. The Thunder Warriors who broke the techno-barbarian tyrannies and unified the cradle of mankind became the template for every act of administrative death that would follow. Their fate reveals the machinery's earliest gears, crude but recognizably the same engine that would later consume primarchs and chapters with bureaucratic precision. These were never meant to be permanent soldiers. Engineered in the gene labs beneath the Himalaysian peaks, the Thunder Warriors represented brutal expedience over elegant design. Chemical enhancements sustained their massive frames through subcutaneous ports that leaked constantly, staining their armor with amber fluid. Combat stimulants and growth hormones overclocked their hearts, sleeved their joints in ceramic, dialed their aggression beyond negotiation. They burned bright and died young. Few survived past 30. Their enhanced biology consumed itself, organs liquefying, nervous systems firing random impulses that sent them into uncontrollable rages. They were weapons tuned for one song only, close-quarters conquest, and they could not be retuned. This instability served the unification wars perfectly, but made them liabilities for what came next. The Great Crusade demanded soldiers capable of decades-long campaigns, warriors who could establish compliant governments rather than simply destroy resistance. The Thunder Warriors' chemical enhancement made them unsuitable governors and worse diplomats. Their brief lifespans required constant recruitment. Their psychotic episodes created diplomatic disasters when they massacred surrendering populations or turned on their own officers. Most critically, their existence contradicted the Imperial truth's demand for clean origins. The solution emerged as ceremony. Mount Ararat had served as a Thunder Warrior fortress during the final unification campaigns. Now it became the site of what proclamations called a final muster and triumph, what private documents termed the quietus. The surviving Thunder Warriors were summoned for what they believed would be recognition of their service. Banners climbed the wind, laurels were distributed, golden wine-filled cups heavy enough to count as weapons. The orators praised unity and sacrifice while custodians in ceremonial armor took positions that had nothing to do with ceremony. What followed was systematic elimination disguised as honors, a 3-day battle that left the Thunder Warriors extinct and their fortress reduced to radioactive glass. Erasure began before the mountain cooled. In the nascent administratum's deepest chambers, a new department was taking shape around this first experiment in institutional forgetting. The Office of Scrutiny emerged from what had been simple territorial cataloguing, its clerks now tasked with more delicate work. They developed protocols they termed damnatio memoriae, civilized language for the ancient practice of burying names under state authority. The process began with reclassification. Thunder Warrior regiments became prototype formations in military documents, then test cohorts, finally superseded assets. Each redesignation made them easier to ignore. their achievements attributed to early Imperial forces without specific attribution. The procedural language was rough but functional. Early seals came in 3 colors: Imperial red for authority, black for legal closure, ash grey for public sanitation. Scrutineers struck plaques, altered triumphal rolls, removed reliefs from public spaces. The terawatt foundries melted bronze statuary whose faces had been chiseled down to anonymity. Muster ledgers acquired neat blank spaces where numbers no longer added up. A veteran's daughter found her stipend suspended because the man who had earned it no longer corresponded to any file. This work required infrastructure. Clerks with strong wrists operated iron presses in rooms lit by phosphor lamps, their fingers stained with red wax used to seal documents marked for eternal silence. They compiled deletion indices the way quartermasters tallied boots, developed standardized forms for memory removal, established hierarchies determining which facts could be safely forgotten. The habit of forgetting began to pay administrative dividends. Most importantly, the Thunder Warrior's fate established precedent. Service to the Emperor did not guarantee survival. Loyalty was expected but not rewarded with security. The Imperium's needs took precedence over individual lives, however heroic or devoted. This principle would echo through millennia, justifying countless future erasures of servants whose existence had become inconvenient. Walk the palace's inner corridors today and examine the mural bands girding the great halls. 20 numerals painted in gold leaf march along one ceiling, each framed by laurel vines and astral charts. 2 of those numerals were veiled in sable cloth before the first interstellar transports left their berths. The drapery appears integrated into the original art, dusted daily by servitors, a permanent readiness to subtract. No crime had been recorded, no scandal documented. The space was prepared because the system understood its own needs. The Thunder Warriors taught terror that victory and forgetting must share a budget line. When the machine learned to close accounts while blood was still warm, it discovered that absence itself could be shaped and deployed. The procedural language drafted to bury Unity's first instruments would be refined until it could unmake angels with administrative flourish. In the chambers ahead, we meet the clerks who perfected this work, men and women who delete for salary, who already have 2 empty slots waiting on their forms. The veiled numerals in the palace murals are not decoration, but doctrine made visible. 2 slots prepared for forgetting before the Great Crusade left Sol, their sable cloth sewn into gold leaf with architectural permanence. The Thunder Warriors taught the Imperium to delete its own defenders. The Lost Legions taught it to make deletion itself into policy. What began as expedient murder became systematic demonstration of power. We do not know what the 2nd and 11th Legions did. We know what their absence accomplishes. Early Crusade fleet manifests preserve the pattern in negative space, 20 columns for Legion deployment schedules, 2 systematically blank across thousands of documents. The headers were scraped away with surgical precision, parchment grain undisturbed. Remembrancer chronicles contain passages that begin mid-sentence, their opening clauses excised so cleanly you can smell the horse glue where vellum was lifted and replaced. A later hand writes in the margin, corrected to doctrine. Victory monuments across dozens of worlds display identical sculptural voids where 2 figures once stood among their brothers. The bronze was poured around negative space planned from the foundry stage. On some planets, the empty niches collect rainwater and birds' nests. On others, they serve as sermon points where preachers explain the virtue of clean numbers. Sculptors learn to model nothing. The faithful learn to venerate absence. This quality of silence requires enforcement scaled to proximity of forbidden knowledge. Binding oaths prevent even loyal primarchs from speaking the lost names. The formula precise: to utter would be to divide. To divide would be to deny unity. To deny unity would be treason. Penalties escalate through the hierarchy. A trooper repeating tavern rumours receives lash and labour. A captain faces penance and duty reassignment. A remembrancer caught sketching from memory vanishes into transportation. The chain holds because breaking it breaks everything. The 9 seals of remission achieved full ceremonial form through the Lost Legion's deletion. Senior scrutineers conduct the ritual in chambers lined with sound-dampening ceramite, their voices dropping to whispers as they intone protocols refined from the crude stamps that buried Thunder Warriors. The first seal bears Imperial crimson, the aquila pressed in, wax heated to precisely 47 degrees. The second, in midnight blue, marks administratum jurisdiction. The third, bone white, indicates Mechanicus technical compliance. Each subsequent seal adds institutional approval until the 9th, pressed in clear wax that dries transparent, completes transformation from glory to void. The bureaucratic choreography requires 6 hours and 17 minutes, timed to conclude when Terra's sun reaches zenith. Junior clerks prepare wax at specific temperatures. Servitors operate presses with mechanical precision, ensuring uniform impressions. When the final seal dries, the subject ceases to exist in any administrative sense. The ritual transforms heroes into managed absence, but the Lost Legion's true function transcends concealment. The empty numerals serve as permanent policy instruments, shadows held open to absorb future contradictions. Their erasure occurred not after betrayal, but during the Crusade's expansion, when loyalty peaked and success bred dangerous independence among primarchs. The deletions were preemptive strikes against future disobedience, demonstrations that even the Emperor's sons could be reduced to administrative errors. Every loyal primarch who looks upon those vacant spaces understands that their position depends on continued compliance. The absence teaches what presence cannot, that imperial love is conditional, brotherhood revocable, that even demigods exist at administrative sufferance. When entire legions can be subtracted and the suns still rise, what can individual protest possibly change? This generates what archivists privately term a palimpsest civilization. Catalogues list page ranges corresponding to nothing. Library rails carry sealed boxes from vault to furnace and back as audits reconfirm that destruction was properly executed. Cogitators cache residual metadata, then flag themselves for purgation. The munitorum bills for getting to the same account that feeds the fleet. Deletion at this scale demands infrastructure beyond ceremony. In the administratum's subsector redactor, clerks labor in shifts maintaining absence. They process queries about missing legions, filing standard responses redirecting attention toward acceptable topics. They monitor publications for unauthorized references, flagging violations for correction. They maintain blank spaces in official records, ensuring gaps remain properly formatted across all documentation. These workers receive standard wages plus discretionary bonuses for maintaining sensitive classifications. Job descriptions list archival maintenance rather than professional forgetting. They work normal hours, take standard leave, participate in efficiency reviews, where performance is measured in anomalous references corrected per solar cycle. The banality is essential. When erasure becomes routine administrative work, it loses moral weight. Inside the redaction offices, forgetting has performance metrics. Clerks compete for promotion based on processing oblivion with bureaucratic precision. The 9 seals await application wherever blood is still warm, ready to transform fresh heroes into historical void. The machinery of forgetting operates on quotas, schedules, and salary scales. The clerks who delete angels for salary work in chambers beneath the palace's eastern wing, where subdivision redactor transforms the crude lessons of Thunder Warrior erasure into industrial precision. Here, forgetting operates according to filing hierarchies that would impress a Mechanicus data priest. Active deletions, pending erasures, completed voids, appeals under review. The workers wear ink-stained gloves and shoulder badges bearing the Aquila over a closed book. Their notice boards carry the same charts as any other department: quotas, deadlines, commendations for exceeding targets. The targets here measure folios annulled per solar. When the numbers climb, the Empire breathes easier. A file's death follows predictable stages, each governed by doctrinal justification protocols that ensure erasure serves Imperial interests. Requisition begins when field commanders, political commissars, or High Lords identify formations whose continued existence presents complications. The request arrives on standard forms specifying the nature of inconvenience, strategic liability, doctrinal deviation, resource inefficiency, or political embarrassment. Junior clerks conduct triage, sorting submissions by urgency and administrative complexity. A regiment that has witnessed forbidden knowledge requires different handling than one that has simply become expensive to maintain. Approved cases advance through hierarchical review. Senior scrutineers compose legal rationales explaining why deletion serves the greater good. The language is precise but flexible. Formations are reclassified as operationally superseded, their service records marked pending administrative reconciliation, their personnel transferred to alternative deployment status. Each phrase carries specific bureaucratic weight, triggering downstream processes in departments that need not understand broader implications. The Munitorum stops shipping supplies, the Mechanicus suspends equipment maintenance, the Ecclesiarchy removes names from prayer rolls, the Nine Seals ceremony has evolved from crude stamps into elaborate bureaucratic choreography. Senior scrutineers conduct the ritual in chambers lined with sound-dampening ceramite, their voices dropping to whispers as they intone protocols refined across millennia. The first seal bears Imperial crimson pressed in wax, heated to precisely 47 degrees. The second, midnight blue, marks administratum jurisdiction. The third, bone white, indicates Mechanicus technical compliance. Each subsequent seal adds institutional approval until the ninth, pressed in clear wax that dries transparent, completes transformation from glory to void. The ceremony requires 6 hours and 17 minutes, timed to conclude when Terra's sun reaches zenith, ensuring erasure occurs under heaven's witness. Cogitator purges cascade outward immediately. Servitor-operated deletion protocols scrub references from databanks across sectors, replacing names with null values, reassigning equipment to different formations, redistributing personnel files to match new organizational charts. Machine priests enter sequences that overwrite directories with sanctified noise, hymns in binary carrying check, some blessings. Cross-references fall into null sets, off-site mirrors auto-sync their emptiness, red diodes blinking like dying pulses. Residual metadata is quarantined in cold vaults, then scheduled for periodic review to ensure the dead stay dead. Memorial alteration completes the physical transformation. Stone carvers remove names from victory monuments, replacing them with generic phrases like unknown heroes or faithful servants. A master artisan drafts new inscriptions that compress 3 campaigns into the phrase early Imperial forces while preserving meter so hymns still scan. The cost rolls against the petitioner's budget. Servitors in dust masks climb scaffolds to chisel away reliefs, leaving polished nothing where heroes stood. Then the numbers move. Resource allocation scripts recalculate automatically. With formations reclassified as expendable, Medici tonnage reassigns to favored units. Transport slots open for the politically reliable. Supply convoys reroute to accommodate new priorities. This economic incentive sustains the entire system. When deletion improves logistics, forgetting becomes fuel. For the war machine, families receive what redactor terms name null stipends, script payments acknowledging service by someone whose identity can no longer be officially recognized. The document reads like a receipt. Beneficiary recognized under Article 3, no record, stipend issued in script redeemable at designated outlets, exchange contingent upon security review to prevent grief exploitation. The widow at the counter learns the outlet sells salt, needles, devotional paper, nothing that tastes of meat. The clerk cannot help. To query would trip a seal. To trip a seal would divide the body. Performance in redactor is measured in folios annulled per sola, a metric treating human erasure as quantifiable productivity. Clerks compete for promotion based on processing oblivion efficiently. Consider Scribe Major Illith of Line 5, who receives a Munitorum petition tagged urgent. A convoy cluster must clear within 72 hours, but a reliability flag chapter occupies the manifest's heaviest berths. She opens the harmonization template, selects suppression for certain defeats, annihilation for casualty logs that might invite audit. She enters auxiliary assets in lieu of chapter designation and ticks the box labeled expendable to unlock freight reallocation. 24 berths free. The lamenters receive late orders by crackling Vox to redeploy without support. The favored regiment earns additional armor plating. Illith records her productivity as 3.4 folios annulled per sola ahead of quota. This creates feedback loops where success breeds appetite for further success. Formations are marked for erasure not because they have failed, but because their absence would be useful. The moral cost compounds through institutional distance. The clerk who marks a formation expendable never sees the battlefield where that decision plays out. Each participant performs a narrow function within a larger mechanism whose full implications remain compartmentalized. In distant sectors, these administrative decisions manifest as operational reality. A cursed chapter with bone-colored identity tags instead of names receives deployment orders to systems that exist on no current star charts. Their sealed orders will not open until they reach coordinates marking whether no map records. The archive has already written their erasure before the battle begins. What happens when deletion precedes dying, when the machinery of forgetting operates faster than the speed of blood? The deployment orders arrive through crackling Vox channels as the Lamenter's strike cruiser drifts in the shadow of a dying star. Coordinates sealed in brass cases, destinations that exist on no current star charts, weather patterns no meteorologist has catalogued. For this chapter, such orders represent not anomaly, but routine, the expected continuation of their systematic persecution, refined across centuries into administrative art form. Their gene seed traces directly to Sanguinius, their loyalty proven through a millennium of faithful service, yet they wear bone-colored identification tags bearing batch numbers rather than names. This is not accident. This is managed suffering deployed as Imperial policy. Their daily reality reflects their administrative classification as conditional assets in subdivision redactors' filing systems. Ration distribution operates according to loyalty tiers established by the same clerks who process folios, annulled per sola. The Lamenters receive Tier 3 allotments, nutrient paste, and synth protein bars, while politically favored formations enjoy fresh killed meat. Their quartermaster signs for half the munitions promised and twice the penances, each shortage documented as supply chain complications rather than deliberate sabotage. Apothecaries triage not by medical need but by anticipated replacement time. A brother whose gene seed is judged valuable receives stimulants and sutures, while veterans with too many machine-corrected fractures receive stimulants only. The catechisms they recite during pre-battle rituals have been rewritten to promise redemption through anonymous death rather than glorious victory. In service unnamed we find our worth. In death unrecorded we achieve peace. The liturgy teaches them to desire erasure as spiritual fulfillment, their chaplains intoning prayers that transform martyrdom into administrative convenience. A servitor has underlined one passage in Greece. Redemption accrues to anonymous sacrifice. The brothers have learned this lesson well. Their pattern of catastrophic deployments reveals coordination that transcends coincidence when aligned against administratum resource allocation decisions. The Badab War positioned them against fellow loyalists, ensuring they would emerge either traitors or tainted by association. The Corinthian Crusade deployed them to hold 17 separate fronts, with resources calculated for 3. Each assignment follows identical templates generated by the same algorithms that mark formations expendable to free transport capacity for more reliable units. When Scribe Major Illith processes a Munitorum petition requiring convoy clearance within 72 hours, she opens the harmonization template and selects the Lamenters for suppression, their chapter designation replaced with auxiliary assets to unlock freight reallocation. Control mechanisms ensure their suffering continues without resolution through bureaucratic sabotage disguised as administrative error. Reinforcement requests disappear into processing queues where clerks apply delays calibrated to arrive after battles conclude. Equipment requisitions receive partial fulfillment, bolt rounds without magazines, magazines without bolt rounds, both delivered to coordinates the chapter vacated months earlier. Medical supplies arrive with expiration dates already passed, their spoilage documented under transport complications rather than deliberate timing. The Lamenters preserve their own records using improvised methods that reveal both desperation and institutional resistance to forgetting. Squad-level Vox operators carry wax-track cylinders salvaged from damaged equipment, the delicate grooves recording names, battlefield vows, kill claims, and last rites. The technology is fragile and flammable. Heat makes the lacquered wood weep. Exhaust vents can soften grooves until voices become slurry, and a misaligned plasma discharge can melt months of memory into anonymous noise. Battle brothers hide cylinders in armor joints, weapon housings, even surgical implants, anywhere surveillance might miss them. When discovery seems imminent during commissar inspections, they destroy the evidence themselves rather than face charges of unauthorized documentation. This creates profound psychological tension between Astartes' conditioning and survival necessity. Their genetic programming demands absolute loyalty to the Emperor above all considerations, yet pragmatic reality requires adapting to systematic abandonment. A captain quietly diverts a Thunderhawk to extract an exhausted squad rather than secure a symbolic relic scheduled for display in a cathedral whose address has already been reassigned. A chaplain truncates the litany of true names to conserve oxygen during bombardment. An apothecary breaks regulation by storing extra gene seed harvested from mortals because the chapter's banks run perpetually low. Each compromise is written as practicality and remembered as guilt, their flexibility itself becoming grounds for suspicion. Adaptation suggests independence. Independence suggests potential disloyalty. Their suffering serves dual institutional functions beyond simple punishment. First, it demonstrates that even gene sons of primarchs remain subject to imperial authority, that no bloodline grants immunity from administrative death. Second, it provides visible warning to other chapters about the consequences of political inconvenience. When the Lamenters deploy to impossible battles wearing bone-colored tags, every Astartes formation understands what awaits those who become expendable. Recruiters whisper this lesson to aspirants without moving lips. When codex-compliant chapters refuse politically tainted deployments, thin courier cases arrive with summaries of the Lamenter's last decade, the ink still drying on casualty reports. The system perpetuates itself through feedback loops where persecution justifies further persecution. Each failed deployment generates reports supporting arguments for reduced resource allocation. Casualty rates become evidence of unworthiness to suffer less. Political isolation prevents coalition building with other formations. The Lamenters become trapped in administrative machinery that transforms their loyalty into the mechanism of their own erasure, their devotion fueling the engine designed to consume them. Other formations share their fate through different mechanisms but identical logic. Abhuman cohorts receive similar bone-colored tags, similar ration restrictions, similar deployment to expendable fronts where their lives are measured in tonnage rather than names. Ogryn auxiliaries carry Vox equipment whose cylinders spin with names spoken once before, burning out, their massive hands cradling devices they cannot repair. Rattling snipers maintain unauthorized tallies of their own casualties because no one else bothers counting. Penal cohorts march with detonation collars synced to commissariat auspex, their silence learned from men who have been promised nothing. The collar of expendability encircles many throats, all leading toward the same coordinates. We march with them now toward weather no-map records, carrying orders sealed until they reach the place already marked for their forgetting. The archive has written their erasure before the battle begins, the 9 seals warming in chambers where clerks process oblivion for salary. What happens when deletion precedes dying, when the machinery of forgetting operates faster than the speed of blood? The bone-colored tags worn by the Lamenters mark them as expendable asset, but they do not march alone toward administrative weather. Across the Imperium's endless fronts, Abhuman auxiliaries and penal formations bear identical classifications, their lives measured by the same calculus that reduces heroes to tonnage. The survival tax extends beyond Space Marine chapters to encompass every formation recruited from populations deemed questionable, unreliable, or simply convenient to sacrifice. When denial becomes cheaper than relief, the Imperium deploys its most disposable defenders to absorb its most expensive failures. Ogryns, Rattlings, and penal battalions appear in casualty ledgers under the classification miscellaneous tonnage, their deaths recorded by weight rather than individual loss. A quartermaster's manifest lists 300 kilograms of Ogryn casualties alongside damaged equipment and spoiled rations, the human cost bundled with material waste for efficient processing. The economics are brutal but legible. Training an Ogryn to obey basic orders costs fewer thrones than raising a replacement guardsman to competent standard, yet both cost less than equipping a Space Marine with new warplate. The result is systematic policy to push the cheapest bodies into the most expensive fights. This generates feedback loops where expendability becomes self-reinforcing. Forces recruited from criminal populations or frontier warrens are labeled politically unreliable, so resupply is curtailed. Thin munitions and failing equipment degrade performance, which confirms the label. Rattling snipers maintain unauthorized tallies of their own casualties because official records classify them as equipment losses rather than personnel. Penal cohorts develop underground networks sharing survival information, their criminal skills adapting to military necessity. Each adaptation demonstrates independence that justifies further suspicion, their flexibility becoming evidence of potential disloyalty. The spiritual cost manifests through ecclesiarchal doctrine that tolerates some mutations while declaring others unclean, the line shifting according to strategic need rather than theological consistency. Ogryn auxiliaries receive blessing for their simple faith, despite obvious genetic deviation from human baseline. Rattlings earn tolerance for their marksmanship that serves the Emperor's justice. Meanwhile, other abhuman strains face extermination campaigns for identical deviations, their crimes often indistinguishable from those blessed in allied formations. Grace is rationed like ammunition, distributed according to tactical utility rather than moral principle. Consider Auxiliary Prime Grax, an Ogryn bodyguard whose massive frame carries Vox equipment too heavy for baseline humans. The device strapped across his shoulders contains delicate wax-track cylinders that record battlefield communications, their grooved surfaces capturing names, coordinates, tactical assessments in spiral impressions. The technology is inherently fragile. Heat makes the lacquered wood weep. Plasma discharge can melt months of memory into anonymous noise. Rough handling can snap tracks mid-recording. Grax has learned to shield the equipment with his body during bombardments, his enhanced durability protecting records that might preserve the names of fallen comrades. During combat, he watches the cylinders spin as voices speak names once before burning out. A sergeant calls roll for his decimated squad, each response recorded in grooves that will survive only until the next plasma strike. A Medicae recites casualty reports while Grax holds the equipment steady, his thick fingers gentle around mechanisms he cannot repair. When the cylinders overheat and begin smoking, he knows that voices are becoming silence, memory dissolving into administrative void. The wax tracks melt under conditions where baseline humans would already be dead, their destruction marking temperatures that Ogryn physiology can still endure. Regional commanders learn to requisition auxilia when facing tactical problems that conventional doctrine cannot solve economically. A fortress world under siege requests Ogryn shock troops rather than additional guard regiments, because Ogryns can advance through kill zones that would annihilate baseline humans. Reconnaissance missions behind enemy lines get assigned to rattling infiltrators rather than scout marines because rattling casualties represent acceptable losses. Minefield clearance operations use penal cohorts rather than combat engineers because explosive collars ensure compliance while preserving valuable specialists. These decisions concentrate at crisis points where multiple expendable forces converge under conditions designed to maximize their disposal. Supply convoys carry mixed formations toward coordinates selected not for strategic value but for administrative convenience, places where large-scale casualties can be processed efficiently, where multiple erasures can share bureaucratic overhead. The machinery anticipates grief and moves to prevent it from slowing ships. The siege at Borospur represents such convergence, where the lamenters will anchor the breach while Ogryns carry Vox equipment through rad snow that makes wax crawl under recording needles. Rattlings will mark targets on rooftops that buckle like wet slate. Penal cohorts will absorb gas and first return fire while scrutineers warm seals with their breath as casualty reports arrive, sinking deletion to volleys. Wax and blood will boil together under conditions that test the limits of both human endurance and recording technology. What happens when deletion begins before the dying stops, when administrative machinery operates faster than the speed of blood? The rad snow at Borospur falls in greasy sheets that hiss when flakes touch heated armor, each particle carrying isotopes that burn exposed skin and fog optical lenses. Vox networks stutter through atmospheric interference, forcing Imperial formations to rely on shouted commands and the desperate coordination of collar-synced penal cohorts. Through this chemical miasma, expendable assets advance toward coordinates that exist on no current star charts, their deployment timed to coincide with administrative processes occurring 3,000 light-years away in subdivision redactors' ceramite chambers. Auxiliary Prime Grax shoulders his Voxcaster through trenches carved from radioactive ice, the equipment's wax track cylinders spinning as voices crackle through failing networks. The apparatus strapped across his massive frame resembles a shrine to dying communication, its delicate mechanisms recording final transmissions in grooves already softening under heat. Inside the brass housing, stylus needles scratch names into lacquered wood that weeps amber tears when plasma discharges light the storm. Grax shields the equipment with his enhanced physiology, understanding that these sounds represent the last record of men whose existence has been marked provisional by clerks who process oblivion for salary. A commissar stands atop a command bunker whose walls weep condensation tinted green with atmospheric poison, his voice carrying across open channels as he intones the litany of closure. Your names are known to the Emperor, though not to man, your deeds recorded, though not by scribe. For the Imperium, you are nothing. For the Emperor, you are all. The words echo through squad leaders, earpieces and collar-mounted speakers that keep penal cohorts in line, transforming mass execution into sacrament. Explosive collars blink ready in sequence, their red diodes synchronized to heartbeats that will soon stop beating. The lamenters push forward through slag ridges that crunch like glass, their bone-colored identification tags catching the sour light of burning sky. They move with practiced precision through impossible terrain, each step measured against the certainty that retreat has been administratively foreclosed. Their bolters bark incandescent death into enemy positions, but their numbers dwindle with every meter gained. A captain falls when plasma fire ruptures his armor, his tag melting against scarred ceramite, while Grax records the impact, the sudden silence, the managed absence. Simultaneously, in the Administratum's climate-controlled bunkers, senior scrutineer Kellyan applies the 9 seals of remission to Boros Spur documentation, even as casualty reports stream through cogitator networks. Her chamber maintains precise temperature regulation to preserve wax integrity during the ritual that must conclude before the battle ends, ensuring seamless transition from operational reality to administrative void. The first seal bears Imperial crimson pressed at exactly 47 degrees, marking the Aquila's authority over what will be forgotten. The second, midnight blue, establishes Administratum jurisdiction over deletion processes. Her assistants monitor Vox intercepts from Boros Spur, tracking the collapse of organized resistance through degrading signal quality. When Grax's equipment begins smoking, they know the last witnesses approach neutralization. Each subsequent seal adds institutional approval as real-time casualty projections update on cogitator screens. The 6th seal bears Mechanicus technical compliance in bone white. The 9th, pressed in clear wax that dries transparent, completes transformation from glory to managed absence precisely as organic memory ceases to threaten official narrative. Cogitators cascade deletion protocols across sectors immediately. Transport manifests rewrite themselves as formations disappear from active rosters, their allocated tonnage reassigning to politically reliable units. Supply convoys scheduled for Boros Spur receive new coordinates, their cargoes redirected to support operations, whose participants might survive to require resupply. The Munitorum's efficiency algorithms celebrate resource recovery, calculating improved logistics ratios as heroic formations convert to available capacity. Grax falls when explosive ordnance vaporizes his position, his body shielding the Vox equipment until superheated air makes his enhanced lungs seize. The cylinders melt in temperatures that Ogrin physiology can endure only briefly, months of recorded names dissolving into anonymous noise as wax tracks run like tears. His final transmission carries across failing networks, coordinates repeated by habit, a Mechanicus call for extraction that will not come. a sergeant's roll call answered by static. The equipment dies with him, its delicate mechanisms no match for conditions where baseline humans would already be ash. The Lamenters breach outer defenses through tactics that cost 60% casualties in the first wave, their chaplain broadcasting final rites, while rattling snipers provide covering fire from positions that collapse under return bombardment. Penal cohorts surge through gaps torn by Space Marine sacrifice, their collars detonating in coordinated sequence as objectives are achieved or advancement fails to meet tempo requirements. The chemical miasma thickens until battles are fought by sound and muzzle flash in perpetual twilight. Kellyan completes the ritual as Terra's sun reaches zenith, timing coordinated across time zones to ensure erasure occurs under heaven's witness. The transparent wax of the ninth seal dries just as the last vox signals from Boros Spur fade into static. The battle ends not with victory or defeat, but with administrative closure, military operation transforming into processed void within minutes. Supply convoys begin moving before the raid snow settles, their manifests updated to reflect new priorities. Crates marked "No Record" pass widows' queues where families wait for casualty notifications that will never arrive. The formations died, the archives closed, the machinery moved on. Scribe Major Illith files productivity reports showing folios annulled per solar exceeding quota through efficient batch processing. Was this punishment for past failures or policy designed to optimize resource allocation through systematic disposal of inconvenient assets? The question assumes these represent different categories rather than complementary functions of the same administrative machinery. At Boros Spur, forgetting operated as logistics and morale management, transforming heroes into tonnage through bureaucratic alchemy. Who benefits when heroes become tonnage? The answer reveals how erasure stabilizes the very system that consumes its own defenders. Boros Spur revealed erasure not as institutional failure but as administrative success, the choreographed deletion of expendable assets demonstrating how the Imperium transforms potential problems into managed absence through bureaucratic precision. What appeared as shameful concealment of military disasters actually functions as prophylactic maintenance, preventing systemic collapse. The machinery that consumed the Lamenters, auxiliary prime Grax, and thousands of expendable formations operates according to calculated utility rather than moral principle. In an empire that cannot pause, forgetting becomes essential infrastructure, as routine and necessary as cogitator maintenance or supply convoy scheduling. Erasure stabilizes resource allocation by eliminating the logistical burden of supporting formations whose continued existence complicates Imperial operations. When Boros Spur formations received administrative closure, their supply chains immediately rerouted, transport capacity freed, munitions redirected to politically reliable units. This prevents audit paralysis that would otherwise freeze subsector transport grids through investigations, cross-branch reviews, and reparation schedules triggered by mass casualty events. The 9 seals cancel the docket entirely. No inquiry means no grieving assemblies, no ceremonial furloughs, no diversion of priesthood bandwidth to remembrance rituals that slow redeployment cycles. Munitorum Circular 447 Tertius, distributed to quartermaster stations across 17 sectors, codifies these lessons in neutral administrative prose. Priority closure is instructed for formations with high grievance indices, units whose cumulative losses, isolation, and perceived institutional slights create mutiny risk exceeding acceptable parameters. The document specifies triggers, casualty rates above 90% in single engagements, exposure to classified information requiring witness elimination, or simply accumulation of service records that might inspire dangerous loyalty among surviving personnel. When formations approach these thresholds, deletion machinery activates automatically. The metrics underlying these decisions treat human suffering as quantifiable risk factors in complex equations, balancing operational effectiveness against political stability. Morale hazard calculations assign numerical values to grief, measuring how battlefield losses might degrade fighting spirit in adjacent formations. Loyalty reliability ratings factor genetic heritage, recruitment demographics, and service history into algorithms predicting future obedience. A chapter with Primarch bloodline scores higher baseline loyalty but also elevated independence risk. Penal cohorts rate maximum expendability but minimum tactical effectiveness. The mathematics of erasure optimize for institutional survival rather than individual justice. These calculations manifest through micro-level interactions designed to prevent emotional contamination from spreading through Imperial society. In a tithes office 3 districts from the palace, a widow presents name null scrip issued for service by someone whose identity can no longer be officially recognized. The clerk examines documentation acknowledging sacrifice without identifying the sacrificed, payment for grief that cannot be processed through normal channels. When she asks about her husband's unit, he cannot help without violating seal protocols that treat information as contagion requiring quarantine. To assist would trip a seal and divide the body. He apologizes to the Empire instead of to her. This demonstrates the moral inversion at Erasure's heart. What resembles institutional shame functions as prophylactic against systemic breakdown. By shaving edges off grief, the machine maintains thrust. By declaring certain deeds unhappened, it avoids accounting that would slow subsequent deployments. Forgetting operates not as apology but as lubricant, poured where friction might spark doctrine into fire. The state pretends to blush while tightening ligatures on memory itself. Yet every successful closure teaches the bureaucracy to treat expendability as renewable resource, creating nested contradictions where policies maintaining imperial stability also train the system to consume its own components with increasing efficiency. Each deletion establishes precedent for future erasures, normalizing administrative death as routine maintenance rather than exceptional punishment. Clerks processing folios annulled per solar develop professional expertise in transforming heroes into void, their productivity metrics rewarding systematic forgetting. The machinery learns to anticipate its own appetite, preparing empty slots before crimes are committed. This generates feedback loops where formations witnessing systematic erasure of peers develop defensive strategies, prioritizing survival over doctrine, their pragmatic adaptations becoming grounds for suspicion of potential disloyalty. The system punishes both blind obedience and intelligent adaptation, creating impossible standards ensuring continued supply of expendable assets. Commanders learn to budget with absence. The cleanest ledger contains the fewest names. The logic escalates when applied to genetic inheritance rather than individual formations. When Space Marine chapters are marked for erasure, their gene seed reserves are simultaneously targeted for deletion, preventing future recruitment from tainted bloodlines. This multiplies stakes exponentially. Destroying a chapter eliminates current threats, but sterilizing their genetic heritage prevents future problems from the same source. The cursed foundings represent systematic experiments in engineering loyalty through controlled forgetting. Their black ledger recording metrics measuring not just current effectiveness, but projected loyalty degradation across centuries. When gene lines become liabilities, deletion targets the future itself, calculating optimal lifespans for formations bred to die serving purposes they will never understand. The utility of amnesia demonstrated at Boros Spur finds its logical terminus not in quiet deletion, but in open warfare, where systematic abandonment transforms loyal defenders into secessionist rebels through administrative precision. The Badab War represents institutional forgetting weaponized as governance policy, its participants driven to rebellion not by corruption, but by the same machinery that processed folios annulled per sola in subdivision redactors' ceramite chambers. When erasure encounters organized resistance, the Empire learns to starve first and punish later, converting neglect into laboratory conditions for testing loyalty's breaking point. The astral claws commanded the Maelstrom Zone when their fate was sealed through bureaucratic reclassification rather than battlefield failure. Tithe downgrades reduced their worlds from strategic to conditional priority in Imperial ledgers, automatically triggering decreased supply allocations through algorithms that treated territorial value as variable rather than fixed. Planets contributing agricultural surplus and mineral extraction quotas for centuries found their assessments revised downward through reviews discovering previously unnoticed soil contamination and infrastructure decay. These downgrades justified systematic resource reallocation, their supply convoys rerouting to sectors with higher loyalty reliability ratings. Munitorum shipments arrived months late and tonnage light, their delays calibrated through processing queues where clerks applied variance offsets against chapter requisitions. Equipment arrived damaged or obsolete, medical supplies with expiration dates already passed, munitions in calibers no longer compatible with their weapons. Official roles marked the astral clause with conditional recognition, pending compliance review that never concluded, preventing access to standard support networks while maintaining their obligations to Imperial service. They existed in bureaucratic limbo, neither fully recognized nor formally censured. Territorial control of abandoned worlds created de facto political independence as necessity forced adaptation beyond codex limitations. When Imperial supply lines failed, the astral clause requisitioned from local sources to maintain defensive operations. When recruitment quotas could not be met through traditional channels, they expanded beyond standard parameters to protect populations the Imperium no longer valued. Each adaptation violated regulations while serving Imperial interests, creating legal justifications for further abandonment through feedback loops, where survival necessities became grounds for suspicion. The revelation buried in Administratum archives demonstrates that Imperial analysts predicted this outcome through models calculating optimal lifespans for formations bred to serve purposes they would never understand. Classified assessments projected that systematic abandonment would drive the astral clause toward independence within acceptable timeframes, creating justification for military intervention that would eliminate the chapter while testing Imperial response capabilities against organized Space Marine resistance. The abandonment was deliberate policy testing, rebellion its intended conclusion. Maelstrom Contingency 3B included response packages, propaganda themes, and redeployment savings post-closure. Other participants entered the conflict sharing histories of institutional neglect that made them natural allies against an Imperium practicing systematic forgetting. The Mantis warriors had endured decades of supply restrictions and deployment to expendable fronts. Their gene seed flagged for unacceptable deviation through clerical errors, never corrected. The executioners faced constant scrutiny over recruitment practices and tactical doctrine, their appeals for support vanishing into the same processing queues that delayed astral claw requisitions. The Lamenters arrived wearing bone-colored identification tags marking them as conditional assets, their destruction calculated to free transport capacity for more politically reliable formations. The spiritual cost compounded as loyal formations protecting abandoned populations faced impossible choices between doctrine and survival. The conflict pitted loyalists against loyalists, forcing decisions that fractured brotherhood and tested the meaning of Imperial service. Loyal mutants proved more dangerous to dogma than obvious traitors because their continued faith exposed institutional hypocrisy while their adaptation challenged notions of unchanging perfection. Traitors could be demonized and purged, but faithful independence spread like contagion through formations witnessing systematic persecution of their peers. The war itself demonstrated how erasure machinery adapts to active resistance rather than passive acceptance. Subdivision Redactor prepared documentation applying the 9 seals of remission to entire sectors. Deletion protocols scaled to encompass populated worlds whose continued existence complicated Imperial narrative. Cogitators calculated resource recovery from territories marked for administrative closure, algorithms optimizing extraction schedules to precede orbital bombardment. When the astral claws transformed into Red Corsairs, their survival as renegades generated ongoing complications that simple erasure could have prevented. Post-war consequences established templates for managing similar situations through corrective realignment rather than total destruction. The executioners faced the cruelest choice: survival through betrayal of former allies, or extinction through continued solidarity. Their decision to turn weapons on brothers they had fought beside revealed how institutional pressure could fracture even genetically bonded loyalties when survival demanded collaboration with the machinery of their persecution. The Mantis warriors received century-long penitent crusade assignments that functioned as permanent punishment states, their redemption perpetually deferred through impossible objectives and constant surveillance. These outcomes demonstrate how penitent crusades operate, not as paths toward forgiveness, but as sophisticated control mechanisms, maintaining useful formations in states of controlled existence. Chapters that survive institutional abandonment are never truly trusted again, their effectiveness reduced through oversight that prevents both rebellion and genuine redemption. The machinery learned to harvest utility from its own victims, transforming potential martyrs into perpetual penitents, whose suffering serves as warning while preserving tactical capabilities for Imperial use. The executioner's choice to survive through betrayal of former allies established what Imperial doctrine euphemistically terms corrective realignment. The transformation of potential martyrs into perpetual penitents, whose continued existence serves institutional needs while preventing genuine redemption. Their weapons turned on. Brothers they had fought beside, not from corruption, but from calculated recognition that collaboration with the persecution machinery offered the only path to chapter survival. This moral compromise purchased continued existence at the cost of perpetual surveillance, establishing templates that would govern all subsequent management of politically inconvenient formations. The Mantis warriors received century-long penitent crusade assignments that function as sophisticated control mechanisms disguised as paths toward forgiveness. Their battle barge operates under constant observation by embedded Imperial Navy commissars whose authority supersedes chapter command structure in all tactical decisions. Vox scrubbers keyed to oversight runes monitor every communication, filtering transmissions through algorithms that flag unauthorized pride or insufficient penitence. Their chaplains recite modified catechisms acknowledging perpetual unworthiness, liturgies rewritten to promise redemption through anonymous death rather than glorious victory. The Catechism of Abnegation replaces traditional battle prayers: name nothing, claim nothing, own only guilt. Daily operations reveal how forgiveness creates permanent states of controlled existence rather than temporary punishment. The Mantis warriors cannot deploy without prior authorization from sector command, their battle plans requiring approval through processing queues, where clerks apply delays calibrated to test patience and obedience. Equipment requisitions receive partial fulfillment with documentation explaining shortfalls as corrective measures rather than punishment. Armory issue operates under caps by sortie, bolter shells crossing counters under scribes whose tallies cite theological justifications for restraint. Medical supplies arrive expired, weapons maintenance deferred, until malfunction rates approach dangerous thresholds. Gene seed storage protocols modified to increase spoilage risk Through temperature variance and contamination exposure, surveillance extends beyond tactical oversight to psychological monitoring through embedded observers trained to detect signs of resentment, independence, or unauthorized pride in chapter achievements. Battle brothers learn to suppress natural reactions to victory, their celebrations muted by awareness that joy might be interpreted as insufficient penitence. Squad leaders develop habits of self-criticism in official reports, describing successful operations through language emphasizing luck rather than skill, imperial grace rather than personal competence. The machinery teaches them to erase themselves preemptively, serving without identity in hopes they may continue to serve. The executioners face different but equally corrosive restrictions following their submission through betrayal. Their gene seed undergoes mandatory purity testing at intervals shorter than standard protocol, the frequent extractions weakening their apothecary's ability to maintain chapter strength. Combat doctrine reviews occur quarterly rather than annually, their tactical innovations subject to approval processes that delay adaptation to evolving threats. Most psychologically damaging, they are periodically assigned to operations alongside formations they betrayed during Badab, forced to serve with survivors who remember their choice and judge them accordingly. The psychological cost is silence that grows between victories, private arithmetic of debt that no amount of blood seems to clear. This creates survival tax where effectiveness is systematically reduced through oversight that prevents both rebellion and operational excellence. Penitent chapters cannot achieve the tactical flexibility that makes Astartes formation superior to conventional forces because every deviation from approved doctrine requires authorization through chains of command designed to test obedience rather than enable success. Logistics operate with breaks engaged. Interventions that should take days require weeks. Relief actions die on desks requiring signatures from 3 different worlds. The survival tax is paid in lost initiative and grinding knowledge that loyalty no longer proves anything except tolerance for humiliation. These mechanisms connect to broader gene seed politics where biological purity becomes weaponized as post hoc justification for predetermined political decisions. When chapters become inconvenient, their genetic heritage faces scrutiny through testing protocols that discover deviations previously overlooked or classify acceptable variants as dangerous mutation. The Adeptus Mechanicus operates assessment procedures where political considerations influence scientific conclusions, their tech priests applying standards that fluctuate according to institutional needs rather than biological reality. The process retains the appearance of empirical science while serving administrative convenience. Magos biologis in scarlet tabards conduct purity assays, their auspex analyzing enzymatic markers and mitochondrial sequences with precision to 3 decimal places. Yet seals affixed at report's end can invert the meaning of numbers above them. Where allies are desired, variance becomes nominal drift with intolerances. Where containment is policy, identical readings transform into progressive instability, requiring recruitment restrictions and reinforcement denial. Appeals require access to tribunals that penitent formations are forbidden to approach without escort, and the escort carries authorization to suspend proceedings. Consider the Flame Falcons, whose sudden genetic instability coincided with their investigation into Adeptus Mechanicus corruption. Their mutations manifested precisely when their elimination would resolve political complications, the timing suggesting that purity assessments serve predetermined conclusions rather than objective analysis. The 9 seals applied to their gene seed stocks bore cog-toothed authentication from tech priests whose loyalty to Mars superseded commitment to scientific accuracy. This reveals how penitent crusades function as permanent control states rather than temporary punishment. Their century-long duration ensuring that no chapter survives to challenge the system that created their suffering. The machinery harvests utility from its own victims while maintaining the fiction of eventual forgiveness, transforming potential martyrs into perpetual examples whose continued existence warns other formations about consequences of inconvenience. Chapters wear collars made of paperwork, their every triumph amortized against prior sin, their every request suspect, their every deviation becoming exhibit for prolonging restraint. When gene seed purity becomes political weapon, the future itself becomes hostage to present compliance. The cursed founding's black ledger records systematic experiments in engineering loyalty through controlled forgetting, their metrics measuring not just current effectiveness, but projected loyalty degradation across centuries. When gene lines become liabilities, deletion targets the future itself, calculating optimal lifespans for formations bred to die, serving purposes they will never understand. The testing protocols ahead will demonstrate how politics influences scientific assessment, where biological reality bends to administrative necessity through mechanisms that make erasure appear as natural consequence rather than deliberate policy. When gene seed purity becomes political weapon, the Flame Falcons discovered that biological reality bends to administrative necessity through mechanisms that make extermination appear as natural consequence rather than deliberate policy. Their investigation into Adeptus Mechanicus corruption on Forge World Lucius uncovered evidence of systematic resource diversion and techno-heretical practices that threatened to expose institutional rot extending far beyond a single facility. Within 72 hours of filing preliminary reports, their apothecaries began detecting anomalous cellular activity in battle brothers who had participated in the investigation, spontaneous combustion events that reduced warriors to ash while leaving their armor intact, a biological impossibility that served political convenience. The mutations manifested with suspicious precision, affecting only those who possessed dangerous knowledge while sparing chapter leadership whose testimony might complicate official narratives. A tactical marine burst into flames while cleaning his bolter in the armory. A scout ignited during morning prayers, his death witnessed by servitors whose memory cores would be scrubbed within the hour. An assault marine combusted mid-leap during training exercises, his squad brothers watching in horror as their brother became living pyre without apparent cause. Each incident generated medical documentation supporting predetermined conclusions of progressive genetic instability requiring immediate containment protocols. Purity, we are told, is measured in enzymes and devotion. In practice, it is measured in signatures. Magos Biologis, Vex Theta, conducted the assessment that sealed their fate, his scarlet tabards pristine, as he analyzed the same enzymatic markers and mitochondrial sequences that had received approval during the chapter's founding. The identical genetic variants now registered as progressive degradation requiring immediate action, the numbers unchanged, but their interpretation transformed through administrative alchemy. His report concluded with cog-toothed authentication seals bearing machine script that rendered the 9 seals of remission as checksum deletion, bureaucratic ritual transformed into technical procedure to satisfy Mechanicus doctrine while achieving political objectives. The elimination proceeded with efficiency, demonstrating how entire chapters can vanish with minimal oversight when institutional interests align. Inquisition assets cordoned the fortress monastery, while tech priests conducted biological containment operations that left no survivors to contradict official narratives. The choreography followed established templates, designation change from Flame Falcons to Vector 21FF, a biological risk category permitting sealed orders and restricted discussion. Gene seed stocks received sterilization treatment preventing future recruitment from tainted bloodlines. Equipment underwent ritual purification before redistribution to politically reliable formations. Senior scrutineer Kellyan processed their destruction through the same subdivision redactor mechanisms that had managed Boros spur casualties, applying the 9 seals with mechanical precision, while cogitators updated transport manifests and supply allocations freed by the chapter's elimination. The seals themselves had evolved from wax and him into cog-toothed purity stamps punched in machine script, each impression a checksum confirming deletion rather than ceremonial closure. The transparent wax of the 9th seal dried as the last gene seed samples entered the furnace, completing transformation from glory to managed absence through synchronized annihilation. Documentation followed protocols ensuring minimal trace of the chapter's existence. Memorial inscriptions shifted from proper names to unknown saints whose feast days corresponded to no surviving calendar. Gene ledgers bore cross-hatched stamps declaring checksum achieved and remission complete. Data replication routines pushed conclusions to peripheral archives where servitors overwrote prior references with machine script, resembling prayer. Transport manifests reassigned the chapter's berths without notation, their allocated tonnage redistributing to formations whose loyalty carried higher reliability ratings. The spiritual cost extends beyond the Flame Falcons to encompass every chapter witnessing their elimination. The message was unmistakable. Investigation of institutional corruption warranted complete extermination disguised as genetic emergency. Other formations learned that loyalty offered no protection against administrative death when convenience demanded removal. The threat of similar treatment keeps surviving forgotten chapters compliant, their behavior modified by understanding that gene seed purity serves political rather than biological imperatives. This generates survival strategies violating Imperial protocol while preserving chapter existence under constant threat of similar elimination. The Lamenters develop informal intelligence networks sharing information about Mechanicus assessment schedules, allowing preparation for purity reviews through careful management of genetic samples and strategic rotation of personnel. Battle brothers with anomalous readings receive temporary assignment to distant operations during inspection periods, their absence explained through routine deployment rather than concealment of evidence. Underground networks emerge between abandoned chapters, sharing resources and information despite regulations prohibiting unauthorized inter-chapter cooperation. The Mantis warriors quietly transfer medical supplies to formations facing equipment shortages. Executioner apothecaries provide technical expertise for gene seed preservation to chapters whose medical personnel lack adequate training. These exchanges occur through coded Vox transmissions and dead-drop supply caches, their participants risking additional punishment for violations that serve Imperial interests while defying Imperial authority. The Shadow Imperium of mutual aid operates through necessity rather than rebellion, its participants motivated by survival rather than ideology. Apothecaries exchange gene stock, slivers, labeled as devotional wax. Moving redundancy through pilgrim convoys no clerk thinks to search. Chapter serfs barter maintenance schematics and medici supplies under false abbey seals. Void freighter captains run ghost berths, hiding squads in dead space between hull and manifest. Chaplains swap homilies that function as operational warnings, cloaking survival intelligence in parable and psalm. These networks require clerks, quartermasters, and accountants who risk minor damnation to move paperwork correctly. A tithes office scribe delays a purge command 12 hours, long enough for a freighter to undock. A regimental bookman diverts name null script into memorial funds that cannot be audited because they technically do not exist. He writes names anyway in pencil in ledgers that will burn if discovered and be recopied if not. The Shadow Imperium depends on such hands, small nodes in networks keeping names from going dark and supplies from arriving empty. The Flame Falcon's complete annihilation established precedent that chapter destruction could be achieved through biological justification rather than military action, requiring minimal oversight while maintaining the appearance of scientific necessity. Their fate demonstrates how forgetting becomes extermination when systematic persecution encounters organized resistance, the machinery adapting to eliminate threats before they can develop effective countermeasures. In the survival networks that developed in response, abandoned defenders learned to preserve themselves through mutual aid that violates every principle of Imperial hierarchy while serving its ultimate purpose. In distant trenches, a guardsman accountant maintains forbidden records of his squad, trading rations for ink to copy names onto salvaged bone-colored tags. His ledger begins where official records end, a small act of defiance against administrative oblivion. The shadow Imperium of mutual aid between abandoned defenders operates in margins where survival requires violating the very protocols designed to ensure their destruction. The shadow Imperium of mutual aid between abandoned defenders operates in its most elementary form through individual acts so small they barely register as defiance, yet collectively constitute the most persistent resistance to institutional forgetting. In the trenches of Mordian 7, guardsman accountant Voss wakes before Reveler to beat both the ration queue and the commissar's rounds, understanding that memory requires supplies, and supplies require careful bargaining within an economy where remembrance itself has become contraband. His trade operates on margins that would impress subdivision redactor clerks despite serving opposite purposes. 2 corpse starch bars buy a vial of diluted ink from a quartermaster's mate who siphons from shipment manifests and writes losses off as transport spillage. 3 Las cartridges trade for pencil stubs, shaved with a mess knife until they resemble surgical instruments. His most crucial materials come from bone-colored identification tags pulled from buckets outside the provost's tent, discarded when penal batches rotate forward, and the numbers on their collars change to match new deployment codes. The institutional irony is precise. Tags manufactured to mark expendable assets, repurposed to preserve memory of the expendable. Voss operates from a dugout carved into trench walls, reinforced with sandbags that leak sand like hourglasses, his workspace illuminated by phosphor lamps whose fuel he measures in minutes rather than hours. His ledger began as requisition forms whose reverse sides provided blank space for unauthorized documentation, the pages stitched with comwire into bindings salvaged from a prayer book whose original contents have been overwritten by necessity. He works by dim light so the graphite sheen doesn't show during inspections, writing quickly in block letters that weather dampness and the constant vibration of distant artillery. Each entry follows standardized format that mirrors official documentation while preserving information the official system discards as irrelevant. Name, rank, homeworld when known, manner of death, date by Terran calendar. His handwriting shrinks to conserve space, letters cramped but legible in script, trained through years of processing supply, manifests and casualty reports. He knows the arithmetic of his squad, 11 strong at dawn, 9 at stand to, 7 by noon if the artillery keeps honest time. He subtracts in pencil because pencil can be erased when discovery threatens, but uses precious ink for names they'll never let him speak, drawn slow like a chaplain tracing devotional signs before battle. Control mechanisms designed to prevent such unauthorized memory operate through commissar inspections that treat individual remembrance as sedition against Imperial unity. Political Officer Kane conducts weekly reviews guided by the Catechism of One Body, his portable loudhailer crackling over generator whine as he recites doctrine that declares excessive attention to individual identity as division of Imperial purpose. One body, one will, The many are error. Names divide the spirit. Division is treason. His searches follow protocols designed to detect contraband grief, unauthorized memorials, personal lists, unlicensed sorrow that might breed questions about the purpose of sacrifice. Voss has prepared for such inspections through techniques that would be familiar to clerks processing folios annulled per sola. Pages appear blank when examined, the ink hidden in the paper's warp, pencil letters pressed but not darkened until rubbed with ash. He answers questions without verbs and offers respectful silence where verbs might become confession. His tobacco tin, containing the bone-coloured tags, bears markings that suggest devotional rather than memorial purpose. The commissar's eyes pause on the container and pass on, trained to detect obvious violations rather than subtle resistance. The survival tax extends beyond personal risk to encompass black market memorial practices that emerge wherever institutional forgetting creates demand for alternative remembrance. Before assaults, when laughter grows brittle and men understand they may not survive the next advance, Voss conducts whispered roll calls in voices low enough to pass for prayer. One name spoken aloud might suffocate the rest, so he recites them in pairs, 2 syllables per breath, 2 lives per heartbeat, while his squad answers with the quiet grunt soldiers use when they do not want to be heard, being human. These practices create underground networks operating parallel to official documentation systems, each participant performing narrow functions within a larger mechanism whose implications remain compartmentalized through necessity. A medici maintains casualty lists in margins of medical textbooks, annotations disguised as study notes. A Vox operator copies final transmissions onto wax cylinders labeled as equipment testing, their contents preserved until heat or discovery reduces them to anonymous noise. From a dead Ogrin's kit, Voss salvaged a cracked cylinder whose wax tracks had blistered with heat, the grooves running like tears. He learned to read melted voices by rubbing soot into spirals, tilting under lamplight to trace lines where sound once lived, guessing at cadence from scratch width. This reveals the true significance of the empty cenotaph from our opening. The pedestal whose mounting bolts remain visible was officially scraped by diocesan order, its primarch statue removed through standard erasure protocols administered by the same machinery that processes current deletions. Yet night shifts of maintenance servitors have restored what they can in pencil, their programming modified by someone with access to behavioral matrices or simply corrupted by the sheer weight of what refuses to be forgotten. They rub graphite into faint chisel marks, darken grooves with ash and soap, sketch letters so thin that daylight makes them invisible, while midnight reveals names returning one by one as grey whispers against polished stone. The shadow Imperium reaches even into these forgotten trenches through networks that violate every principle of Imperial hierarchy while serving its ultimate purpose. A Navy rating with freighter berth access accepts Voss's tin of memorial tags, sliding him a prayer card that functions as rendezvous code. A chapter serf in borrowed guard khaki trades disinfectant for pages of names he will carry, to chaplains who will pretend the documentation arrived from nowhere. A tithe scribe demonstrates how to list the dead as equipment damaged beyond repair, ensuring ledgers survive their own audits through bureaucratic camouflage. Voss maintains his forbidden accounting with precision that mirrors the institutional systems designed to erase his work. He records ration bars traded for ink, shells exchanged for pencil, tags recovered from provost buckets. He counts nights without inspection, days without mail, hours between barrages. His ledger balances the squad's debts against the Empire's demands through arithmetic that will never clear. Yet he continues because the account serves not auditors, but the dead who do not want to be alone in administrative void. The work ends as it must, incomplete, An alarm sounds with the dull, practiced thud of incoming ordnance that drives men to stoop on instinct. Dust rains from trench roofs, graphite skitters across pages. He folds the ledger into oilskin, shoves it into false bottoms constructed by sappers whose names appear on page 47. The tin goes under his tunic, cold against skin that understands this may be the last entry. He draws his pencil like a sidearm and writes through tremor that follows the first strike, because stopping means forgetting, and forgetting means surrender to machinery that measures survival in tonnage and treats names as luxury. The final entry breaks mid-syllable. Trooper Kellyan, Mordian, 47th, died holding. The pencil lies beside unfinished words, its graphite, still warm from fingers that wrote until discovery or death became imminent. Whether Voss escaped or joined his documented casualties remains unknown, but his ledger continues work begun by Thunder Warrior deletions and refined through Legion erasures, demonstrating how memory operates as infrastructure parallel to official forgetting, requiring constant maintenance by people who understand that humanity cannot abandon what the Empire cannot afford to remember. We return now to the empty numerals and their true function, armed with accumulated evidence of systematic forgetting deployed as Imperial policy across 10 millennia. The machine's creed emerges complete, survival measured in tonnage, names as luxury, memory as sedition, requiring management through bureaucratic precision that transforms heroes into void while preserving the appearance of honor. The pencil beside unfinished words connects directly to the empty pedestal, where mounting bolts remain visible in polished marble, both representing nodes in a vast network designed to transform inconvenient truth into managed absence through bureaucratic precision that operates across 10 millennia. Guardsman Accountant Voss's interrupted ledger. Trooper Kellyan, Mordian 47th, died holding. Demonstrates how individual resistance joins collective forgetting through institutional processes that absorb opposition while preserving systemic function, his bone-colored tag destined for the same provost buckets where expendable assets receive new deployment codes. The genealogy of Imperial forgetting reveals systematic policy refined through accumulated expertise rather than reactive concealment. The Thunder Warriors taught Terra the grammar of deletion, their elimination on Mount Ararat, establishing that ceremonial honor could disguise systematic cull, while loyal service guaranteed nothing against institutional necessity. The Office of Scrutiny emerged from territorial cataloging to develop damnatio memoriae protocols, transforming crude massacre into civilized, bureaucratic choreography that would evolve into the sophisticated machinery capable of processing heroes into void with Mechanicus-approved efficiency. The Lost Legions provided the template for permanent policy instruments, their empty numerals demonstrating how absence itself could be weaponized as governance tool. The two slots prepared for forgetting before the Great Crusade began were not mysteries requiring solution, but shadows held open to absorb future contradictions, warn potential dissidents, and demonstrate Imperial power over memory itself. Their erasure occurred not after betrayal but during expansion, when success bred dangerous independence among primarchs who might question Imperial authority. When entire legions can be subtracted and the suns still rise, individual protest becomes meaningless against machinery that operates with gravitational reliability. Subdivision Redactor systematized the process through filing, hierarchies and performance metrics that treated human erasure as quantifiable productivity. The 9 seals of remission evolved from crude wax stamps into elaborate ceremonial choreography, requiring 6 hours and 17 minutes, time to conclude when Terra's sun reached zenith to ensure erasure occurred under heaven's witness. Senior Scrutineer Kellyan's chambers now feature cog-toothed purity stamps bearing machine script authentication, deletion rendered as checksum completion rather than ceremony to satisfy Mechanicus doctrine while achieving political objectives through bureaucratic alchemy. The ecclesiarchy sanctified forgetting through liturgical revision, the catechism of one body declaring individual memory as sedition against imperial unity, while promising redemption through anonymous death rather than glorious victory. The Munitorum translated erasure into convoy routes and ration tiers through Circular 447 Tertius, instructing priority closure for formations with high grievance indices. Each institution contributed specialized expertise to collective forgetting, their collaboration ensuring that no single entity bore moral weight while all shared administrative efficiency. Boros Spur demonstrated erasure as logistics, the choreographed deletion of expendable assets revealing how potential problems transform into managed absence through synchronized annihilation. Auxiliary Prime Grax died shielding Vox equipment whose wax track cylinders melted as months of recorded names dissolved into anonymous noise, his enhanced physiology protecting memory until superheated air made survival impossible. The Lamenters advanced through impossible terrain wearing bone-colored identification tags, their sacrifice calculated to free transport capacity for politically reliable formations through algorithms optimizing resource allocation over individual survival. The consequences reveal institutional resilience purchased through individual annihilation, a polity whose memory serves power rather than truth through distributed authority that domesticates deletion across High Lords, Ordos, and Administratum departments. Scribe Major Illith processes folios annulled per sola, without witnessing battlefields where her decisions play out in blood. Magos Biologis Vex Theta certifies gene lines unstable when stability would embarrass the wrong forge. Each participant performs narrow functions within larger mechanisms whose full implications remain compartmentalized through bureaucratic distance, creating collaborative enterprise where erasure becomes routine maintenance rather than exceptional punishment. Yet, resistance persists through parallel infrastructure requiring constant maintenance by people who understand that humanity cannot abandon what the Empire cannot afford to remember. The Shadow Imperium of mutual aid operates through necessity rather than rebellion. Chapter serfs moving gene stock like devotional wax, while Ogrin auxiliaries shield smoking cylinders that preserve voices for a few more breaths. Night shift servitors restore what they can in pencil to scraped cenotaphs, their programming modified by accumulated weight of what refuses to be forgotten, though daylight makes their work invisible, while institutional forgetting continues with mechanical precision. The final payoff sequence demonstrates systemic completion. Voss's unsigned tag joins growing piles in Provost tents, discarded identification markers from expendable assets whose numbers change to match new deployment codes. In subdivision redactors' climate-controlled chambers, a clerk stamps folio annulled on documentation, transforming his interrupted ledger into processed void, productivity metrics updated to reflect efficient batch processing of unauthorized memory. The 9 seals dry on fresh documents bearing machine script authentication, while new formations receive deployment orders to coordinate existing on no current star charts, the machinery anticipating its own appetite through prepared empty slots. The empty pedestal stands revealed not as monument to forgotten heroes, but as demonstration of imperial power over memory itself, the mounting bolts visible by design rather than oversight. In an empire this vast, survival is measured in tonnage, and names are luxuries that wars cannot afford. The dark truth about the forgotten legions is not what they did, but what their absence accomplishes, permanent demonstration that in the 41st millennium, Erasure is not punishment but maintenance, as routine and necessary as the rising of distant suns over worlds whose defenders have been reduced to administrative void.